let's make our CMS administration from looking like this to something more nicer, like this, for example. And every CMS needs a administration part, and we actually started with our login and our sample dashboard, and it looks okay for administration. It could look nicer, but the administration of a website is usually used by certain people who are not end customers, not our audience, if you want to call it like that. So we don't actually need to hire a designer for the entire administration part that will actually used by only one or two people. Luckily, we don't need to, because there are a lot of free templates. One that's very popular is the AdminLTE, which is free. So if we Google for AdminLTE, and also Martian suggested it in one of his comments. So let's see how it looks and how to implement one. Here is the live preview of this template. Obviously, make sure that you are on the actual website. I will put it in the description. But here we can see how this administration template looks like. And there's a lot of pages, widgets, UI elements, and things that might come useful for us, like the forms, for example. Every CMS has a lot of forms and a lot of elements, so there are general elements that we could use with our application so that we don't have to style it in order to have the consistent look throughout our application, our administration, right? And if we look at the documentation about how to install it, we can see that there are multiple methods to install it, of course. We could use the npm, debugger, or the composer, or directly via Git to clone it for the Git. I will, however, just download the latest release so that we can see and understand what is actually going on. Then that way we can own our project, and if you decide to install some other administration part other than AdminLTE, you can do it following the similar principles. This is how I would do it if I would have to do it on one project. So let's download it from here. We'll not actually download the release candidate, we will just download the latest release one from here. And once downloaded, I will just copy the entire content of the zip file that they have inside one project folder, for example, the public admin, and let's make one folder called theme. So I'll just extract all these files into this theme folder just so that we can test how it works and open it locally so that we can see if all the elements are working fine, and just keep it there for the reference for the time being. Now, since it is in our public admin folder inside the theme folder, we can actually access it from our local website. In my case, I have the Darwin CMS admin/theme, right? That's where I put it. And we can see the exactly same thing that we've seen. We can see that all the icons are working, all the examples are working, the UI elements, the icons, and all the colors are there, which means that we have downloaded what we need. Basically, now it's our only job to replicate it here inside of our dashboard, or even here on the side of the login page. I will skip the login page for the time being, just to save the time, but the principles are the same. And I actually noticed that since I've deleted the session, I got these errors here in the login HTML saying that the array is not defined. And I will just quickly go inside of this place where we are displaying the errors. And since this is not defined, if there are no errors, I will just put the null coalescent parameter or the operator that will just use the empty array if this is not defined. And then it will basically loop through the empty array, thus not displaying any errors here, and everything is working fine. I also remember that we did the validation of this login, and I will actually loosen it up now, because the validation is usually done while registering users or entering new data into the database. Login only checks if data matches what is already in database, so the validation is sort of not that important here. So in our dashboard controller, for the administration part, I will actually comment this no empty spaces and special character, and then do the same here for the validating the email. And while I'm here, I might as well change this that we forgot to change in the last lesson. So this will also get all the error messages now from our validation class, right? Not writing it here in the controller. And now our administration will work fine if I enter the admin, and the password is what I've entered here using the hash in the one of the previous lessons. You can use whatever you have in the database or whatever your password is. So if I would to sign in, I am now welcomed to the administration. Now this is not the prettiest administration, but that's why we are here. If you have forgotten how to make the administration, check out the video linked in the description on how to make hashed passwords and how to enter them in database. I will also delete this admin temp file here, which is actually making the hash for the database, just so that we don't forget it and somebody might get the access to our database, right? So this index temp file, I will delete it and remove it from the source, but you can navigate the Git repository and we can use tags to go back to previous lessons if we might need this part of the code someday. In the future, we will make the administration that will actually insert the correct password inside the database. So let's delete that one. Now we can see the default action here inside of our controller just echoes welcome to administration. That is what we see when we go inside our browser here. And that is now where our theme should be. So we can now do the same thing that we did for the public part. We can create a layout folder with the default HTML inside of it. If you remember here, we have the layout with the default. That is our theme. So let's make that here inside of the admin. So a new folder called layout with one HTML file called default, for example. And let's actually copy and paste the our newly created theme folder with the index HTML file from it. So I will just blindly copy everything and paste it here. It will probably complain about a bunch of things missing, but let's just see what happens. Nothing happens, of course, and that is because we are still echoing this part here. Now, the admin is pretty much a separate application besides our public application. However, it can actually share quite a lot of code like our classes and databases and functions. So we can check how we did the view part in the public controller, like inside, for example, the page controller. If we open that one, we can see that we are creating this template object here, and we are providing it with the layout. Now, if we would have to choose the layout manually in every controller, that would be a bit cumbersome. So what we can do now is move this template from being a standalone part of the application to one property of every and each controller, because we are sharing controllers throughout all parts of the application, or all our modules. They are sharing this controller, and majority of them actually need a template. So instead of making this template here with passing the default theme or whatever theme each and every time we want to show a page, we will just move it here inside of our index PHP, for example. So in our main index PHP that is actually starting our application inside the public folder, we are making the controller. If you remember, this controller name is dynamically coming from the database that is connected to the pretty URL, right? So we can here just set the one property for the controller called template, and that will be a new object of type template. So now inside of our controllers, since we have this property template, let's just make it inside of the main controller here, right? So it will be the, let's put it public for now, just so that we don't forget about it. Since we are setting that property here, we can actually access it from our page controller, right? So we can just say, instead of template, we can just say this template, because this template is this controller, and that controller is this controller that we are creating here, right? This here, this one here that we are creating dynamically. And then we are setting its property. So this property here, this template, which is a new template, is exactly the same property that we are accessing in our controller here, this template, whereas this refers to the controller that we've just made, just to be clear about that. Of course, there are multiple ways about doing it, but we are flexible and we can always change how we do things, because we are not afraid to change our code, right? We have the full control of it. So let's see if this works on some of the pages on our website. And we can see that the about page and contact page and home page, they each work fine, just like we had here inside of our page controller. If I remember correctly, we're doing the same thing inside the contact controller, right? We are making a new template, and we can just remove that and use this template, because again, all of our controllers are now using the same parent controller. We talked about that in inheritance module, in inheritance lesson. And here we can just use again this template that we've created and we can remove this initialization. Now, if we double check, everything is still working fine. We can even try and break it by removing this template inside of our contact controller. That way, we can see that there is nothing shown. So it means that this is actually working as expected. Now let me close this, all other controllers that we are not interested right now. And here inside the default action, we can actually use the same thing. We can just say this template view, but don't forget the admin part is actually making a different dashboard controller here with this if else. For now, we can continue with that if else, it doesn't matter. But we can also say that this dashboard controller, right? Property template equals to new template with the theme default. It's exactly the same thing that we've done inside of our public index PHP and public template or controller here. Sorry. So now inside of our admin dashboard, we could just say that we want to see whichever page. For example, let's say the static page, right? So the page views and the static page from our page model here. We have this static page that we want to show inside of one default theme, the default layout that we've now said it is default, but we now want to refer to this admin default, right? But if you remember, here inside of the admin, we are just saying the default, and we now need to refactor a bit this template so that it knows that we want to use the admin actually. So inside of our template, we actually do not want to use this layout defined here, because this layout would then make it difficult for us to go inside the admin folder, which is one level up, if you can see here. The layout from the code would then go inside of this folder, but we actually want to go one level up and then go inside of this layout login. And of course, there's multiple ways to handle that one, but I will do it just simply by removing this layout from here completely and then just defining that inside the appropriate index files. So inside of the public, we will just say use the layout default, right? While inside of the admin index file, I will then just say use the admin layout default file. If we just double check our public part of the website, the contact us, it is not working, of course, and that is because I have copied one / too many. Oh, I actually forgot to save the file. So if I would refresh, we can see that public portion is still working. And if we would now to go to our admin portion, we see that there are some undefined variables. That's fine. Let's check that one in the dashboard controller. So this variables is not defined for now. Let's define it as an empty array because we don't have any variables to show here. And now we can actually see our HTML, which is great, but it doesn't look as pretty as we want it. It doesn't look as promised on this live preview page here. So it's obvious that it is missing a bunch of styles and a bunch of colors and images and everything. So let's clean up our newly created admin template a bit and let's fix all those dependencies that it is missing. So in our newly admin created default layout, let me close all other files. So here, instead of including all these font awesomes and icons and all these plugins that are being used in the example, we don't need all of those. We will just include the bare minimum that we need, and we can always, of course, add more once we have the need for that. So you can choose what you want to leave and what you want to move. Maybe you want all the fonts included or all the icons. I will just remove everything to keep things simple. The only thing I am going to leave is this theme style here, because that is the actual admin theme that we will need and we will use. So I will just leave that CSS here. And we can see that it is pointing to the dist CSS file, and that is not correct location because we don't have any dist folder. So we will now need to create one CSS folder where we are going to put this AdminLTE minimum CSS. So let's make that one inside of our public folder. Don't put it here inside of the view, because this is not the relative path on the file. This is relative path inside the browser, the web root. And I will talk about that in a minute to explain all the differences and to explain how this can be a very difficult thing to figure out and how it can be confusing. At least it was very confusing for me until I really understood it. So here inside the admin, I will just make one folder that's be called CSS. And inside that CSS folder, I will move this file that we have inside our theme, inside of the dist map. We are following this one here, so the CSS, and then we'll look for the admin LTN minimum CSS. That's fine for our purpose. You can use this one if you want to change it. In fact, let's just use the full CSS here. So I will just copy it here, and then I will check this to be the .css like it is here. And let's remove this dist folder here so that it is inside of the CSS AdminLTE. And this navigation bar and the search form can be there, but the left navigation, it is something that I would really like to make it a bit easier. So all this here, if I would to refresh now, actually, I will actually get the CSS working. But let's just remove all these links from here because we don't need them in our application. And we can just look for dashboard version 1. So these are the links from there, and I will just remove them pretty much all. However, I will try to match these tags, so when I remove them, that I don't screw up the HTML or have some tags that are not closed. And I guess I need to remove it up to here, we will see. So yeah, this li is open, I just need to close it here. So the li is now closed and the ul is closed and everything is fine. We only have the dashboard. And that is this one. I guess we can have additional more items here. We can have the contact us, etc. This menu open, I guess it's not in because it's not the menu. So we can have the contact here, for example, just to have one more page. And now we have these two. One of those should not be active. This one, now it's a bit better. So I will just go around and clean pretty much everything that we don't need, everything that's not absolutely necessary to get started. You can, as mentioned, leave all the font awesome icons, fonts, and everything, and even the JavaScript. If you would to look inside of our console here, we can see that there is a lot of files that are not being found. Majority of them is JavaScripts. For the time being, we don't need any of those JavaScripts. So I will just go to the bottom of my file where all the plugins are being included, and I will just remove them so that we have something that's working nice. And now at least we don't have any errors inside of our console. And this is very easy, right? Because I've done this before recording this video. And even though it is trivial, I had some problems of figuring out which file should be positioned where and which file can be removed. And it can get you in trouble if you, for example, forget to put the slash as I did in a previous problem that I had, or if we would put the slash here, and if we would refresh, you can see that it's not working. The CSS is not being worked here. Or if you accidentally move the CSS files not here inside of the public admin CSS folder and then refer it as the CSS folder from here, but if you'd put it here near the views where it's most logical, because inside of our default view file here, right, we are sort of expecting that the CSS file is here, or either in the layout or either in the CSS. For someone, what I'm talking about here just clicks and everybody understands what is the web root, what is the directory root. But I personally struggled quite a lot with this. And I also had people asking me in the Facebook group or here on the YouTube videos. Derek, for example, encountered this problem and wrote about it in the comments. And I also recently got a new colleague up to speed on my previous project, so I had to explain to him exactly this thing, how relative and how absolute paths work. So I understand it can be very confusing what is actually going on here. Now, if you remember the very first lesson on Model View Controller in this series, our entire website goes through one and only index.html, this file here. And that file from this URL here, right, the Darwin CMS in my case, is actually pointing towards this file index.php here that is being on the local browser here inside of the, for example, C projects, Darwin files, public, wherever you put it on your website. This public part actually is something that we didn't do in the very first lesson. We did it in a bit later, in several lessons later. But the point is that this index.php file and this index.php files are what the browser is seeing, and this is what our server is seeing, right? So our server sees the entire file path and then reaches this file, but our browser, it does not see any of those files over here. It just reaches this path and then knows to access this index.php file. And the reason we moved this file inside of this public folder here is so that this index.php file is the only file accessible to the browser, because you can see why. The browser cannot go one folder up here to reach some other file that's outside of this public folder. The browser can only access what is after this public folder. So the browser can read only files that are here and here on inside of our computer, and those are those CSS files and the image files and the JavaScript files, etc. So everything that's inside this public folder, but outside of our project root. So the browser cannot get to any of these files, at least by intention, unless we screw up some security, right? And we also have this admin here that actually complicates things a bit, but we will come to that in a second. Don't worry about this admin file. Let's pretend that it is not there, it does not exist there. However, that means that our actual template files, that our templates are not inside of this web root here. They are not inside of this public folder, right? They are somewhere here. They are inside of these folders named view and the modules, layout, and the dashboard and controller and contacts view and what you have. So all these files that we are using from our PHP code, they are actually here. They are not accessible by the browser here because they are, again, not inside of our public. And I will repeat one more time, this website is actually pointing to this public folder, but not to any other folder that is not inside of the public. As we mentioned, there is one imaginary line here that is splitting what is accessible for the browser only, so that the browser can only read what is inside of this public folder. So the CSS image files and what have you. Because again, all these files are only included throughout index.php. So our code has to go through index.php to reach the contact, for example, the contact us page, or to reach the dashboard on the home HTML, or to reach whichever file we need. It has to go through this index.php here, which also means that to the browser, everything is going to be presented as one index.php file. The browser does not know that there is an HTML file or that there is a template engine or that there is whatever. It only knows about this index.php file, which is this index.php file, right? And at the end, our browser is combining all of its files that it works with, all dynamically created files, and spits it out as, again, you guessed it, one index.php file. And I've talked about this in the very first video, again, about the model view controller framework itself and how and why this works like that. But again, from our browser's perspective, there is no difference if we include the file inside of this, for example, the home HTML, or inside of this contact HTML. The browser does not care. It does not know. All it knows is that it is going to look inside of this folder here and get whatever we have here. So we can pretend that we are writing all of our CMS code, everything that we've ever written, we can just pretend that is actually one and only index.php file that we are giving to the folder. Imagine that you have one giant index.php and you're writing entire CMS in one giant index.php, which I have actually seen people do it. I don't really understand why, just to show off, but yeah, whatever. Browser does not care what's going on your server, it just cares about the HTML that we are spitting out to the browser. Because in the end, all of our code, our objects and our design patterns and our solid principles and everything, all they're doing is just formatting some data and making one HTML to the browser and giving it to the browser, sometimes CSS and everything, but it's the whole point of our application is to generate HTML. Sometimes you might give a JSON to or something else to some application, but that's sort of like a text in some format that we are spitting out. So now if we would to open this default HTML of ours, and if we would to include one CSS or JavaScript maybe, or some image, or maybe have a link to some other page, we have to think how will this look from the browser side in terms of where the files are located. So our dashboard home HTML file will include a CSS AdminLTE file, like we have here, right? This CSS AdminLTE file is something that, even though it is inside of our admin layout, whatever, or wherever else you find it, our browser only sees this /admin/index PHP file, right? So then it knows that relatively to this admin index PHP file, it is going to add another path like CSS slash what do we have here? We have the AdminLTE CSS. If I paste it here, this CSS will be shown. So then this is the correct path that we should use inside of our template. And you've noticed that it does not start with admin /CSS, it just starts with CSS because we are now having something that's called relative and absolute links. And this is where this admin folder comes into play. So in other words, that would mean that this index.php file here at the end will see this command, this path here, as the relative path that it should take from it. So if we just relatively add this command to index.php as we've shown, it will become the CSS file that we need. And now we have also relative and absolute links, and this is where our admin folder comes into play. Now, since we agreed that each and every file we work on, either the default layout or some view from our module, they all act as index.php file, which means that if we use relative path, we are talking relatively to this file here, this index.php file here, right? On our server, it's inside the C projects and Darwin and whatever. But from our browser, we are now talking about the website /admin/index.php. So if we say relatively to this file here, by not starting with the slash here, so this means that it's relative path, then the browser would, as we've seen in our example, it would just add this path, this part here, that we've written inside of our HTML, it will just append that to the relative path of the file that is viewing. In our case, it's viewing index.php, right? While if we would to say the absolute path by starting with this slash here, this means absolute to the root. And in server terms, when you start with the slash here, it is considered as the root of your website or the root of your folder. This root would then translate not to the admin /CSS /adminLite minimum CSS is in our previous case, but it will start from here. So this root or this slash here means that we are going to look the root of our website. So if you look at the difference one more time, we can see that here we have this admin CSS, right? And then AdminLite. But if we look at the absolute path, we now don't have that admin path, which was here previously, which means that we are going from the root of our website, which is not where we've put our AdminLTE CSS. Now, my suggestion would be to always use the absolute links and paths from the root of your public folder. That way, we don't have to think about pretty much anything here. Files will always be there where we accept them. And this goes for the links to the CSS files, but also to links to other pages as well, not just the files we are including, right? But if you get stuck any place, just think about the browser's perspective. It should help you debug the problem. Does this explanation make any sense? Please write me a comment if you have additional questions, and I will discuss them more in future videos. And I also kindly ask you to like and to subscribe to my channel so that YouTube knows that these videos are worth anything to you guys. So as mentioned, I would like to use the absolute path here. So let's add this admin /CSS and see that it still works. And yeah, it does. So let's close this one. And now, since we have the contact here, we can actually make one more menu that will be for listing of all the pages that we are going to have on our website. So let's put one pages here. So now when we click on it, it doesn't take us anywhere. But what we can do for this one, we can reuse the one of the examples that they had. Here inside of the pages, they have the projects page, which is actually listing all the projects. And that is pretty much exactly what we need. We need to list our pages, right? So inside of our modules, inside of pages, we need the similar way as the dashboard. We need one admin folder here with our admin controllers. And let's call this one the page controller, PHP. So we can just copy what we have inside of our dashboard controller, and we are going to have one default actions and also the authentication We could move this authentication in some logic inside of the main controller and only have a flag here, but for now let's keep it simple. And we are going to make one view inside of our admin folder here, the similar way as we have for the public, but this is the admin portion, right? So we can just copy this static page inside of our admin here and see that it has list of some objects that we actually don't need. Let me first include this page so that I don't forget. So it's inside of the page, then admin and views, and then it will be the page list. So we can just rename it to page list. That way we know what the purpose of the page is. And instead of having this, let's just copy what we had on our mentioned project page here inside of the pages, examples, projects here. But we obviously don't need the navigation and everything, so we need to identify where the main content is starting, and that's from here, not the sidebar, right? And this is the actual contains page content. We can just collapse it and then copy the entire portion here inside of our newly created page. And in our default layout, we are going to find the same part, the content wrapper, right? And we are just going to remove it. And instead of it, we are going to include the page that we are providing. The similar way that we've done in our main public theme here inside of our default layout. So let's find that include here. So we are just including the template here. And that template is something that we are actually providing here. So this portion here, let's just see out of curiosity, how will it fail? And now we are just listing all these projects here, all the pages here. However, we don't have navigation working. We don't have actual list of products here. So instead of including it here inside of the dashboard controller, just as a quick workaround, we are actually going to redirect from here to our newly created module inside of our module page, and the action will be list. Then we can look at this action list and this module parameters here inside of our main HTML index PHP, sorry. So when we see that else if the module equals to a page as we had in our redirect, we are going to redirect to another controller. Let's just copy this one for a quick and dirty fix. And instead of including the dashboard controller, we are going to include the page controller, right? The one that we've just created. And the action in our case will be whatever is inside the URL. So let's see what happens now. If I were to refresh, we are redirected to the module page and the action list. However, this list does not exist. I just forgot about it. We actually need to go to this default here. So if I would just remove that one from our redirect, because we don't have the default action, but that's fine. Our default action should work as a list actually. Now, if we go to the administration here, we actually are being redirected to the page module, and this is perfect place to introduce the homework for you. A lot of people are asking me that you are coding along, which is fantastic. It just warms my heart that I see people actually taking interest in this project. So for your homework, try to make a list of projects inside this template. You cannot do this wrong, so don't worry about it. Whatever you do here will be just fine. So I've made a controller already. I've made this a page controller, right, that we've just done here. Don't worry if you are about to change it, if you want to change anything, if you want to make a new template. I also made this page list template here. Now, this is obviously just listing the main content, the default boxes, right? So see how it goes. We already have the logic with the active record that is getting the elements from the database. See if you can adapt that active record and see if you can expand it so that it fetches multiple things from the database. Do whatever you need to do and just make sure to get at least somehow the list of projects here. It doesn't matter. Even write the SQL, write your own logic if you need. It doesn't matter. The point is that you should be now comfortable after 10 or 12 videos that we've made so far, that you have the correct attitude to go into source code and to do the changes that's needed to get the job done. And also, if I do not mention homework in some of the videos, well, you can always start making the entire CMS from your memory, from whatever you remember. Try not to consult the source code that I've published, and try making your own CMS with all the elements that we talked about. See where you will end up. There is no wrong way when you're learning. So it's okay to do things differently. It's okay to change things around. The more you learn, the better your projects will be, and the next project will be even better than the one that we are making here, because we rarely make a final app from the day one. There is no such company that from the first day made the entire app without some minor or even major refactoring. The Facebook, when it came up, it was nothing like the application that it was today. The same goes for Google or pretty much anybody else. We usually have to refactor quite a lot because of the app or the users or the market changes. So if you're waiting for my videos to code along, just start making your own CMS and see how it goes. If you get stuck somewhere, then check the source code from the description and watch again some of the videos, or even search or Google more to clarify some concept. See you in the next video.